How has your journey been learning Spanish grammar? Mine has been quite rough. A love and hate relationship. Maybe similar to your experience, I first got exposed to Spanish grammar through school. So in middle school and in high school, I learned a lot from my teachers who would write some grammar concepts on the board. And then also in class, we would do a lot of fill in the blank worksheets, which I did not like at all. And even now, I still really do not like those at all. I think they are very boring, but I won't rant too much about those. When I started taking Spanish classes in college, I'm not gonna lie, I did learn a decent amount of Spanish grammar, and I would say mostly because it was an obligation for our homework assignments and for the examinations. So I really could not escape it. I would say my main resources for learning Spanish grammar throughout college were my professors and any notes that I took in class, and then my textbook, which I actually still have with me here. And I would say that this was pretty good at explaining a lot of the different grammar concepts. Like what I'm looking at right now is obligations with tener que. It explains what that is, and then explains how you would use tener que in a sentence. So tener que plus infinitive is used to express an obligation. So tengo o tienes que estudiar para el examen, comprar un regalo, or traer el vino a la cena. There's also formal versus informal register, like tú versus usted y vosotros versus ustedes. Cuantificadores negativos. No hay azúcar, no hay nada de azúcar. That textbook was quite useful, but apart from just learning the grammar concepts from simple sentences or example sentences, I also did a lot more reading and a lot more writing, and of course, because that was a part of my homework assignments. And when I say reading, I'm not referring to reading Spanish books or anything like that, but primarily, again, I was using my textbook here because if you can see, hopefully, they have these different sections where you can read, where they're including different grammar concepts and new words that you're learning for this particular topic. Like this one is about los hispanos, primera minoría de Estados Unidos. So I used to read a lot in this textbook and then also in my online textbook as well. And sometimes some news articles, but that wasn't that many times. Now, although I did learn a decent amount of Spanish grammar throughout college, I only did the bare minimum. So any studying that I was doing for this Spanish grammar, it was only so I could get the most amount of points possible on my examinations and my homework assignments. I was not doing a lot of extra studying just on my own for fun outside of homework assignments and examinations. Now, this is very important for my journey learning Spanish grammar because after I graduated college, I went to Mexico for 5 days and I realized that I was not fluent at all. So all that grammar that I learned in college, although I had some knowledge of it, it did not translate to speaking and communicating in Spanish at all. Well, I won't say at all, but it did not help as much as I thought it was going to. This is also very important because since I was not in college anymore, I could study and learn Spanish any way that I wanted to. So that's when I started to explore a lot more with different learning methods, and I started to have more of an immersive approach to learning Spanish. I started to read Spanish books, I started to watch movies and TV shows in Spanish, and I was also watching a lot of YouTube videos as well where the content creators were Spanish speaking. Then I also started to have a lot more language exchanges with Hello Talk. So all these different resources that I was using really helped me to get more exposure to grammar, but in a different way than I was in the past. So now I wasn't just studying grammar concepts in a grammar textbook, but now I was actually getting it from native speakers by listening to them and also speaking to them and reading what they wrote. So for me, now I realized that I was getting a lot of exposure to more of real life Spanish. So I was getting a lot of context for the grammar that I was learning in college and high school and in middle school. I was learning a lot more about sentence structure and that, oh, you could use this word like that and you could put this word here and all those different types of things. So it was extremely helpful. But I was also very confused because I was getting exposed to new types of grammar that I was never used to. I second guessed myself a lot when I was texting my language exchange partners. But one thing that really helped me to be less confused was just asking them to correct me a lot. And then every time that they would correct everything that I was writing, I would actually take note of that. I would write down in a notebook what I said or what I wrote incorrectly, and then I would write down the correct way of saying things, and then I would review those a lot. For my many other moments of confusion with Spanish grammar, I went to Google and then I also went to Reddit. So with Google, I would just look up things like, oh, how do you, or example sentences for the preterite tense, or example sentences for indirect objects. And then I would just type that in, and then I would find different articles that would explain those different grammar concepts. And if I wasn't using an article, I was reading through a lot of threads on Reddit, because I loved Reddit a lot because instead of just reading an article, there were multiple people explaining one grammar concept. Or you had many different Spanish learners who were asking different questions about why you would have to use this grammar concept this way, or why you would word a sentence in this particular way versus a different way. So I loved using Reddit for helping me get unconfused with grammar. As you can tell, this part of my journey, I was definitely still more in study mode when I was trying to learn more Spanish grammar. But then in 2021 and also 2022, I found the power of communicating in Spanish to learn Spanish grammar. And this is something that I did not really know was possible, because in 2020, I did not talk that much in Spanish, or I wasn't having many conversations in Spanish as far as when I was speaking. It was mostly through text messages and sometimes with my friend. But apart from that, I wasn't really speaking Spanish. And also that is a big part of learning Spanish grammar, or having comprehension of Spanish grammar, because when we speak, we use grammar as well. Even when I did try to speak to myself in Spanish in 2020, this made me very frustrated because again, it was very difficult to translate everything that I was studying and listening and reading into actually speaking Spanish correctly, or speaking Spanish with correct grammar. There was just a big separation, and I did not really understand why. It seemed like with every new conversation that I was having, I was learning something completely new. This was also a very new and challenging experience, because now when someone would speak to me, I had so much grammar again in my head that I was trying to figure out. I'm like, wait, what did they just use? Are they using the present tense? Are they using the preterite tense or the imperfect tense? So at first I had to figure out what exactly they're trying to say to me. But then after that, I actually have to figure out what I want to say and put all these, or create sentences and just put all these words together from all the different grammar that I was learning. I remember that I used to study a lot before I would actually have conversations. So before I would leave my home, I would just review a lot of my notes. But then I started to do that less and less, because usually during a conversation, I started to realize that I was doing a lot less thinking about the grammar, and I was doing more of, I would say, imitation more than anything. So anytime I was having a conversation in Spanish and I would hear something new, I would ask that person to repeat what they said. Then I would ask them to explain what they just said. And then basically what I would do is take that and then use it when I was speaking as well. So after doing this many different times throughout many conversations, it became a lot easier for me to speak Spanish with proper grammar, or I would say the grammar that I was receiving from these native Spanish speakers, and not just from my notes and textbooks. Honestly, me studying before I would have a conversation in Spanish really did not help me that much, because at the time I thought that I could understand a lot of the grammar that I was using and then translate that to speaking just by reviewing for 10 or 15 minutes, just really fast. And that is not what happened at all. I know now that one big reason why I thought that I needed to study a lot before my conversations in Spanish was because I was just so used to studying all the time, and I wasn't used to having many conversations in Spanish and actually remembering things. So that for me was also very, very interesting and also very strange that I could memorize, when I say memorize, but I could remember a lot of different sentences and new vocabulary words just by listening to another Spanish speaker. The first half of 2021, I was feeling just so confident because now I actually understood more of Spanish grammar and I did not have to go to my notes all the time just so I could speak properly, but I could just imitate what I was hearing from these Spanish speakers that I was having conversations with. But then I went to the Dominican Republic and I faced another big barrier for learning Spanish grammar. I thought I had a really good grasp on Spanish grammar before going to the Dominican Republic, but when I got there, I just did not understand really anybody or anything that was going on. I was very ashamed of myself because I just could not understand anything while I was there and I was super stressed. But that is when I realized that there was a connection in between grammar and the way that Spanish speakers speak and culture. And that is very unrealistic for me to think that I could speak exactly like them and understand the way that they structure their sentences over there, even though before going to DR, I don't think I ever met anybody from the Dominican Republic, or maybe once, but I never spoke Spanish to them. I had no idea what their accent was like, so everything for me was completely new. It was like learning Spanish all over again, and not just for speaking, but also for writing as well. In the Dominican Republic, I also started to have a lot more conversations about topics that I really was never exposed to and that I never had before, like car insurance, how to buy a car in the Dominican Republic, how to rent a car in the Dominican Republic, about apartments, how to rent an apartment, how to buy a car, or how to invest into land. Also, when I was at the airport, I learned a lot there as well by having conversations with different people. Let's see, about how to open bank accounts, and then also about obtaining citizenship in the Dominican Republic, getting married in the Dominican Republic, and a lot of other just legal types of conversations in Spanish while I was there. So for me, that was really interesting because again, here I was getting more exposure to different ways of using sentences because all these different topics, they use vocabulary in a different way. I did not know that. El valor de la suma original ha ido disminuyendo durante 4 años, mientras que el valor de las acciones de Apple aumentó a medida que la compañía incrementó las ventas de sus smartphones y se diversificó en servicios como Apple Music. So that was just about some, I think, Apple stocks here. So just reading sentences like that and hearing that for me was very different, and I just learned a lot from reading on these different topics in Spanish. Oh, I was wrong. That was not about Apple stock, it was about Macy's stock. This is my new and standard way for learning Spanish grammar. I just learn all through context by what I am reading and what I am hearing as well when I'm having conversations with Spanish speakers, and I just use everything that I'm hearing and reading as well. So for example, I just read a medida que la compañía incrementó. So if I see a phrase like that, a medida que, which I'm slightly kind of confused on even right now, what I would do is basically just look at all the surrounding words, look at this sentence, and see how it is used. I don't normally go to a grammar book or, try to, figure out, oh, what is a medida que? A medida que. Okay, what is it? Read up all the different rules that are with a medida que just so I can be able to use it. What I do is just look at that in context. A medida que la compañía incrementó. And then sometimes with new phrases like that, I still do write them down and make sure that I have that phrase a medida que, then I'll write down the sentence that I was in so I can review later. But I do less of studying like that and more, I just try to get more exposure to it. So that's why I like to read, because maybe I will see a phrase like that over and over again, and then I'll be able to see that phrase in context a lot more. Or if I'm having conversations in Spanish, then I'll be able to hear that phrase over and over again. So for me, this has been a lot easier to learn Spanish grammar. And I have to explain a little bit more what I mean by grammar. So by grammar, I guess I just mean how a sentence is structured or how a specific phrase is used. So I'm not referring to any particular rule in a grammar book. I'm not saying that I don't like learning Spanish the more traditional way, which is just trying to understand, for example, like right now looking at pronouns, KS or qual S, and then just learning all the different instances for these two different phrases here, and then just memorizing a lot of the different grammar concepts. But for me, I don't want to put too much time to that. That takes a lot of time to actually remember all of that Spanish grammar jargon versus just understanding how to use the specific phrases and the specific words in context. Like, there's a big difference. By the way, if you do want a resource like this Spanish grammar book here, I have a link to it in the description box of this video. Currently, I don't know everything about Spanish grammar. I'm always learning something new basically every single day. Every time that I have a conversation with a Spanish speaker from a new country, for example, I just started to meet more Spanish speakers from Venezuela, from Colombia, from Honduras, and they all have their different ways of saying things. So I'm always just learning something new when it comes to Spanish grammar, and I absolutely love it. If you're curious to know how I became a fluent Spanish speaker, watch this next video. Y hasta la próxima.